Hi, hi, welcome. What to talk about today? I had a previous video, and I didn't mind everything that was on there, but there were a couple of topics that after I listened to the video, I realized the topics were too close together to represent a genuine me, and so I thought that doesn't seem to be right, so I'm going to be taking it away, erasing it, deleting it, um, denoting it. Anyway, I was doing this abstract painting, and there was a part, ratiocination, the line that when the paint was laid on, it was really, really solid and thick, and then it got smeared. And then it got smeared away from the ratiocination, and it had me thinking about everything that I've been doing on YouTube relative to antinatalism, metaphysical naturalism, and I was thinking about how I had put the name metaphysical naturalism onto the antinatalists, and I had done that because I felt as if it was an appropriate metaphysic to describe their relationship with the world, that their relationship with the world is a natural one, and then hence the paradigms that they hold are relative to that relationship with the world. And paleonymy, 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 this idea that one gets to put a word on their own metaphysic or their own paradigm or their own worldview. One gets to paleonymy, paleonymics, if that's a word, is able to place that on their own position. And I say this because I think about the dialectic that takes place between antinatalists and the world, negatively pointing to the world, stating that they're unhappy with existence, that it's better in a chant, better to have never been. And to know that they mean it, and to know that I inherently see life as good through all of the negatives that I have. But it's not about me, but it is about me, because the dialectic that they use to communicate with people that might be indifferent, agnostic about their life, they're trying to bring into a fold a logical reduction. And although I've tried to sidestep logic in many ways, logic comes home to roost. I have to use it, same as the next person, the best that I can. But it's the idiolect. It's the the way an individual speaks their language in all the tonalities and all the variables of variances and all descriptive capabilities. The idiolect gets to state who it is they are relative to their impending death, their ontic telos, the eschatology. I'm laughing because of my video to Karen having so sidestepped through this collapsing notion of needing the dependency of logic in order to maintain one's position within authorial hierarchies, and breaching that hierarchical demand, even in a principle of spirit. Even when my spirit feels morally off, not just logically off, but it's like the science of the spirit. Anything that is imagined, anything that is considered, anything that is highlighted in one's mind in any particular fashion, coordinate system, association, whatever it may be, that is where the spirit lies. Now, I'm not talking about a disembodiment of, the spirit from the body, like a soul removal from the body. I'm not denying that either, but I'm not talking about that. Instead, what I'm speaking of is the possibility of the linkage that one has to sanity and authority and musts, must-dos, must-think-this-ways, patternings, that there is an exception, a deviance, as Derrida would put it, an erasure, as I think about it, a point or a geometry that indicates a point that lies outside of logical structure, logical form, authorial forms. Anyway, so I was thinking about this painting, the ratiocination, the exactitude of thinking relative to rationality. The ratiocination is a exact use of logic. And I sat there and I thought, okay, I butt up against the antinatalists. I butt up against them because I'm for production of life. I'm for the bringing souls into a telos, a death panel of their own being, of their own doing, of their own growth. I'm afraid of a biblical truth being correct, that there is a binary between good and bad, or the salvation of the soul or the damnation of the soul, that is a predilection that is concurrent within one's life, that has one gauging, their legacy relative to their encroaching their own death. But there's a comforting spirit that seems to come down in times of crisis. And Christ consciousness is also an infinite forgiving. Even when one believes they cannot forgive themselves for something that they've done, there's a bold scream into the good night. You know, not only that you were here, but that this is what you thought and this is what you felt. You know, be damned or be sent to heaven. Either way, you still die in the end. Okay, so this brings me to a personal impasse where I'd like to believe that I'm a once occurring biological organism that has no soul that endures beyond the body. But since I saw the orb, and my girlfriend at the time made the association between the orb and the death of her grandfather, because that happened, that gives me the imagination, even though that rubs right up against my own experience of kind of becoming unconscious and feeling like everything turns to black. Everything just ends. It just falls away in a black light, if you will, which is a lot different than saying a white light, but a finitude as one approaches the telos of their organismal being. They reach this moment where it's neither a prophetic vision of self, nor the negation, nor something ulterior. It's none of that triplicity. It's the opposite of that. It's the vacuum that allows logical form and reason to lie within it, that matches up against a grand, invisible, hierarchical, authorial pyramid. Now, these hierarchies come from scientism to politics to education to general socialization at times. If one is not egalitarian in their behavior, in how they manifest their interactions with the world, then they are following some authority in some manner. So antinatalists like to follow concurrently a moral law that is hierarchical with this demand, this insistence on reorienting themselves to logic for the ratiocination. Get me if my pronunciation is off on these things. Anyway, okay, so self-salvation is a type of auto-effective forgiveness. And by auto-effective, I mean something like masturbatory. That my painting here is a reflection of self. It's both a different entity from this individual to this character, as it is a reflection of this character to this character, which is like a mythic, it's like Psyche and Echo in mythology, where the Psyche remains in itself, but when it looks at its love, it sees its own echo. And so part of the echo of itself is the absence of itself. So there's the presence of itself and the absence of itself. Then there's the alterity to it. There's an inner and an exterior and an ulterior. It's like you can look at moral systems like a doctor has to learn anterior, posterior, starboard, you know, the bow of this vessel that we call a human. Anyway, so I was thinking about these brush strokes that I made, where they go in and then they're pushed away and they fade out. They're pushed in with an exact line, a nice opaque line, and then they're pulled away in kind of a fuzz. And it's that movement, like I'm burying a line around antinatalism, antinatalist arguments, logical form arguments, suffering arguments, imposition arguments. And I'm exacting a line like I'm drawing a line around a dead body. Like there is going to be a paleontology for antinatalism, but I don't mean this as an honorable succession of the idea into the future, as much as a outlining it to set its boundaries, and then to see that most notably, and here I'm going to move more esoteric in my thoughts, because I'm going to speak of geometries, but it feels as if antinatalism is a pentagram, and that I'm splitting one of the tines, one of the points, and then I'm unfolding it into a hexagram. So all of a sudden I've created two binaries instead of one fluid motion that is the pentagram, that is the 5. See, with the 5, there's logical consistency. You can move from point to point. You cover all points. So it's internally consistent, kind of like moving through a square. But to split one of the points would be like collapsing the corner of a cube and dropping, bending this triangle spherically down to a point, or taking a square and loosening the bolt on joint number 1 and completely removing joint number 3 and letting that collapse into a triangle. And all of a sudden there's a hexagram. It's 2 triangles, it's 2 different positions. It needs a corpus callosum just to speak geometrically between the 2. And that's where I got into higher chakras and lowering chakras, and a robustness of yoga that stems from the spine to move, eloquently up into the crown chakra, or the spirit sense. And the whole point of speaking about a geometry, or a shift from a pentagram to a hexagram, is to model the idea that imagination, kind of adding this new point, is a point of imagination, a point where association becomes important, coincidence as opposed to synchronicity. Coincidence takes on a synchronic meaning, even though it's too disparate of elements or variables for one to traditionally read into. Okay, but here I'm making this huge breach. I even prefaced and told you I would be making this breach in logic, prefacing kind of an erasure from logic so I can outline. What I'm doing is I'm not outlining antinatalism as much as I'm outlining a shadow of negativity and complete discouragement, and people self-defiled in how it is their I, their I that stands back, that is the witness to all things, including all the egonic eyes, all the eyes that are caught up in the material physiological strains. The I that I'm speaking of is the I that stands back from that, that's unaffected by it, that witnesses all. The closest thing you could say to, I don't know, where you are when you're hit in the face. Getting to a very strict vision of who I am and not having any insular fat any longer, slicing away the fat, chopping away the bark, getting to the core, getting to the bone. But the whole point is getting to the bone, a part of the animal, a part of the organism, a part of the physiology, a part of this notion that some people chase towards a salvation, and they find salvation in reproduction. They find salvation in reproduction. Other people find salvation in getting their name out as a meme to get placed on the map. I mean, now if you're on the internet, you're supposedly on the map in some way, but to get on the famous map, to get on the self-supporting map, that's a type of salvation. To leave a legacy after you're gone. Like, apparently Abraham Lincoln didn't think that he was going to leave much of a legacy that anyone would know of. And here he is, you know, our first most liked president here in the States. Anyway, so there's this notion of the I that stands back and keeps standing back and keeps standing back and keeps pulling the consciousness back like an onion until it stands bare relative to, if the soul is mature enough and it's met its own dealings with death ideas of its own telos, everything put forward to the end is how I see the telos. Anyway, and then there's a notion, if you believe in an internal soul, even leaving logical structures, I guess the best way to talk about geometries would be to talk about, like, okay, if I'm a very logical person and I follow these authorial rules and I speak in a certain way, dun dun da dare, don't say the words, them dare the words. Go, go, yoke, go. That's my Eminem impersonation that didn't go so well. Dumb dare the words, say dare the words. Here we go. So if you're locked in a logic or some authorial binding, and you're a player, and then you're reaching your deathbed, and you think to yourself, at least I was a cog in the machine. You know, not trying to raise kids, not trying to do anything like that, just that you were a cog in the machine intellectually. You're the point of the logic. Like, you can only lay down as many points within logic as your mortal body is capable of laying down before your final breath. After your final breath, there's this notion that because it's logical or scientific, that it will fold out into the future and somebody else will amass another point that's relative to it. So it's a ghostly future point that people are hoping, you know, that fact takers and bean counters are hoping that the future, you know, accounts for in the paradigm that they're holding. Sorry, kitty. They hold these truths to be self-evident, that logic, if performed now properly, considering all the facts and variables at hand, are constant, not changing, that people in the future beyond your mortal life who share the same language, this intergenerational capacity to manipulate symbols, will come to a new and pointed revelation that your previously held manifold and contribution yielded this future insight. So there's a type of salvation, as Orwell had mentioned it, soteriology, inviting the word in. But once again, I speak from the painter's view, the abstract outliner that's pulling away the paint from the ratiocination, pulling out into a vague movement to outline the corpse of the ethylist, the non-lifer, the anti-lifer, one that would succumb to the idea that suffering is all that should be evaluated when, granted, there is hunger and there is suffering. And I am, as much as I want to say, let's minimalize, marginalize suffering in all of its physiological, psychological, and spiritual senses to the beings as we are here now. Let's do that. In that same accord, I'm trying not to pull open a psychological wound and make life seem worse, darker, harsher than our well-balanced, most often satiated bodies are maneuvering through time. But here, this is a folding over. I already grant much of the argument to the antinatalists. I had said this years ago, give them everything and then step back and see what else is left, and then pull back from there. And that is where that paint stroke comes in. Anyway, now I'm sounding perhaps redundant. All of this stems partially from me getting a real sense of the idea of salvation through children, salvation through family, but salvation through children and offspring, that was put forth from a Mormon environment where that predilection, or that kind of that intrinsic theological thrust was just kind of open-handedly granted in front of you, and I'm a kid of my own parents that were not LDS, but nevertheless I was offspring of them. They're living in that environment, in that cultural framework, but not a part of a particular current, which would be a theocentric current, but noting the outlines to that theocentrism and then walking back from it and trying to get a greater outline of it. And so even though I don't have any children of my own, desires for self-salvation, even though in certain moral regards there's no take-backs for all the negatives that I've done and the things that I've witnessed and the things that I've produced and said. There's no take-backs for those. All of my trespasses, all of my wrongdoings and so forth, that if there is a geometrically greatest God that still punishes, I am more than likely on a damned side. And anyone could look at any, I mean, the first time you purposely smell your own fart, you could see said to be walking off of the moral, like you're not being very moral any longer. And then maybe to enjoy it, wipe your ass and smell it. Already you're, pull your finger out of your ass when you see the neighborhood dad telling his kid to quit picking his nose. It's an interesting thing. So there is this thing where people want to say that God's path through all of humanity would be considered the best, most egalitarian, most fair-spirited path to move one's moral and spiritual behavior through. This is why people, you still have to speak cleanly. There's still forbidden topics. There's still restrictions on freedom of speech in certain cases. And this is all relative to, once again, an authority, and then whether or not you believe that the government contained within the governmental authority is kind of, a god of the polis, Apollo, where the city-state, whatever is in control of these waves, is closer to the divine in its movement as it must be, and so one should allow themselves to be subjugated to this authorial hierarchical pyramid that is the state, that regulates to what degree something is taboo or what degree and in which cases language is to be used. And then there's the punk or the skateboarder, the outsider, those who are exterior to the dramatic social communist commentator, those that are outraged, those that are finding lines to divide lines, split hairs, pick sides, draw swords, develop a battle, see which battles are there to be fought. Where am I trying to go with this, though? That there's an interiority to the hierarchy, which is a boundedness to it, where error and malfunction and your value to the hierarchical logical structures that are authorially implemented that go against one's idiolect. They're bounded in dialectics, and they're bounded in media. But to step outside of that, to be exterior to that, and kind of knock on it again, set its boundaries, or fly completely away from it, then you're in the discussion with whether or not psychiatry is completely a bunk science, or whether or not it has legitimacy to it. Whether or not you take the medical authorial hubris of the whole canon of medicine as it takes a square dancing sidestep to the right and up to get to psychiatry, paints a picture of the mind relative to people's word behaviors, word patterns, and physiological patternings in order to create a diagnosis. And the psychiatric involvement or diagnosis seems to be on the borderline of whether or not you're considered functional within the hierarchical authorial pyramid or whether or not you're not. So, someone that walks and fasts in Kenya on maybe a spiritual meditation, or anyone that spiritualizes their runs, their marathon runs, vocalizes them, might be considered mentally ill in the West, where they're running through a mythic scenarios of being, in animalia, being an animal. They maintain a mythology that goes and rubs against, whatever the normative values are that define the Western canon. So I keep calling this a hierarchy and a pyramid structure because I'm trying to get to ideation, theological ideation, where the schools of, it's not fashionable or cosmopolitan now to refer to it as a hierarchy in a pyramid shape. It's a canon, the canons of philosophy. It's more like a hollow blow, like something that you can cast yourself in and out of. And so by that same result, as opposed to taking this upside down Ephesus pyramid that points to non-existence, point to presence, point to consciousness, point to association, imagination, point to the prophetic, the empirical, but to do so in a point that is in opposition to pro-life, starting out with the intrinsic goodness of being and elevating one's pharmacopoeia of symbols and words and ideas and then behaviors and social interactions into an ideality that one could say is pleasant frosting upon a cake, as opposed, or gold leafing upon the limestone pyramids in Cairo. And basically narrow away this idea of the canon, point to the rigors of the metaphysic that is the ethicist or antinatalist metaphysic, this upside down hierarchical point to non-existence and a preference for non-procreation that they're trying to universalize, sense it in a hierarchy, and then in an instant move oneself not to be tautological, but move oneself into the canon of educational considerations and consider a big cannon pointing to the ground and being shot. Boom! That's what the antinatalist is. You're supposed to blow through the cannon. You're supposed to be able to light one side and shoot out the other end. That's a cannon. To open up the geometry, to splice a tine on a star, on a pentagram, into a hexagram, and then turn that hexagram into a circle, and that circle is the end of the cannon. This might be an illustration of sorts of what I mean by geometry when I'm saying, okay, sense yourself into geometry. You have a cross moving through your body, where your body is a pentagram with the 5 appendages from the torso out. And, you know, think of Leonardo's da Vinci drawing. He's in a square, he's in a circle. You know, think about the cross pattern if you stick your arms out and your feet together. Think of all different yogic patterns and bodily bends and Kama Sutras and relational interactions one can have, not only through a sexosphere, but through business interaction and solo forms, solo katas. Forms that move, kinetic forms, singular forms, the outlines of singular forms. Anyway, so this is the painting ratiocination, and correct me if I'm mispronouncing that. And then here is the smear, the paint that is smudged away. So outline it, or inlay it in this case, and then smudge it. Yeah. I don't know. I still, you know, I wanted to focus still on the idiolect as opposed to the dialect, or any meeting, any group communication, any boardroom meeting, any syndicates. Because, you know, ultimately my value relative to the viewer, whoever's listening to me, will be found in a direct link between my words, my background, the totality of whatever you're garnering from my video. And if you're watching it alone, then you accept my idiolect as I present it. This is all forms of communication. Like polysemy. Polysemy is a pluralizing of possible meanings from a singular word, which is different than monosemy, which is arguably, if one is in ratiocination, they want monosemy instead of polysemy. The polysemy would be like the donut god is do not God, which is do not God, which grants God to do not, but not tautologically removes itself from the sentence, leaving do parenthesis God. do not God, avoid God, or do not God, a command to God to do not. There is a polysemy in... I keep mispronouncing that. Polysemy. I think I'm going to put a vocabulary list below my video of what I'm driving at. Let you guys do your homework on what it is I'm driving at. But anyway, yeah, there's multiple means of attempting to find salvation through one's work, through one's labor, through what one admires and what one admonishes, what one drives themselves to, what one drives themselves for. If, I used to believe that a lot of people were goal-less, or if they had one big goal, that was enough, or their goal being just to survive the day, that was enough. And then other people have much more dramatic notions of how humans should have goal orientation. I apologize to the soft-hearted individuals who I've slung arrows towards. I apologize to them. It's supposed to be like a Cupid arrow. If it goes through, it's only supposed to bleed in beauty. Ouchie wouchie. Soft. It hurts so good. As opposed to its opposite, love is a battlefield. My life is agony. I'm still in this thrust of kind of a delimited goal that's thrusting about me now, that's defined off of me, that'll present itself publicly. Which isn't dissimilar to me just talking and walking. Bowing through the pain of my feet and my awkward body now, through my own break from the most vitally ideal, I've broached the self-ideal. Some people don't get tattoos because it would be morally unclean for them to get one. They would view it as morally unclean. This is kind of like saying that atheists are a religion because of what they believe in unison, or as a collective, as a group, as a totality of nodes speaking, relative to the unknown, which to them they're calling a lot of things that other people would call unknown, they call it known, because they're totalizing the facts of the world as those facts are seen by them. That's why I do what I do, is because not only have I seen what I've seen, but I know variance and variability. And I've seen people swim incredible distances. I think they're incredible. Hell, I think if you can swim a mile, you're pretty incredible. If you can swim 3 miles, you're outstanding. If you can swim to Cuba, to America, you're a demigod. Yeah, what to do with this bit of time that we have. I'll probably get 50 to maybe 75, 80 views on this video for the time being. And so I'm not reaching out to a lot, but I really do appreciate, I appreciate when there's even just a few people that watch the videos. Anyway, I'm wrapping up a second take on a commission, on the second part of a commission. That's why I haven't been doing the big painting. So I'll hopefully be back to doing the painting again in a little while. But anyway, think of yourself as a complete individual that you could be analyzed because of your idiolect as standing out from everybody else like a thumbprint, because that's what you are, is a unique thumbprint, and you associate with people how you choose to and how you are conditioned to, and how you're conditioned to believe in what truth is, how you're conditioned to believe that you understand all of the facts of your physical reality, that there's not more to be found, not just more to adjust the paradigm of physics, but more information about the physical universe that is not yet known, that could be infinite, and not by hundreds of decimal places in increments, but I mean drastic whole purviews of, you know, big swashes and slices. 98% of everything you know about physics is wrong. Anyway, that's what my idiolect leads me to speak. I'd state it, and if I could remember it, I'd state it again. Anyway, I'm just tiring myself out, so I have to get off my feet, walk myself to my limit, enduring, pressing through daily suffering, knowing that my life had been lived with relatively little suffering, and then I made a great leap and caused indefinite suffering. My telos is overlaid with pain. King of pain, king of pain, sung by Sting. And he will always be the king of pain. I don't know. Maybe that's not how his lyrics go. Okay. Moon blue moon, dib blue 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 moon, love 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 ding ding dong ding ding dong blue blue moon, dip 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 doo 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 blue moon, and I nailed see a blue moon, blue moon. Yeah, hopefully my channel will be able to, after I get the webbing, the cobwebs blown out, and people sense a distinction between their notions of truth and value, and positively looking at everything that is, no matter how dramatic, no matter how painful it is, looking at it from the bright side of life as opposed to the dark side of the moon. Because a lot of people are lobbying for the dark side of the moon now. Gary's up to 76 people in his chat rooms on Saturday. It's a goddamn epidemic, folks. Anyway, now I'm just tossing sauce. Okay. You dingbats out there. You wibbly wobblies, wibbly wobbling, trying to get through your day. Thank you for listening. Bing, 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 bing. Thank you for listening to everything. Babu, babu, boo, boo. Oh, it's true, the truth is but a noose and a nuisance that follows you. I lost my vaporizer somewhere in the house, so I'm going to, like a mouse, walk across my keyboard now.